Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're plunging into the really interesting world of serverless computing. We're going to focus specifically on Azure Functions.
Yeah, it's a fascinating space.
Absolutely. I mean, imagine a world where you could just deploy your code
Right.
without ever thinking about provisioning a server or worrying about scaling, patching.
hmm
That's the powerful promise we want to unpack today. How this tech is, fundamentally changing the game.
And let's tackle that serverless name right away because it causes confusion.
Good point.
When you hear serverless, it doesn't literally mean the servers vanish into thin air.
Yeah.
What it really means is that Microsoft manages all that underlying infrastructure for you.
Okay.
So you, as the person writing the code, you're completely freed from that whole management burden.
Right. So Microsoft handles the servers.
Yeah.
But then what is an Azure function? From our perspective, what are we actually dealing with?
Think of it like a small, dedicated piece of code, like a digital butler for one specific job.
A digital butler. I like that.
Yeah. So something happens, maybe a file gets uploaded, or say a message hits a queue, maybe a timer just goes off.
An event triggers it.
Exactly, an event. And your function just instantly springs into action to handle that specific thing. And crucially, like you said, the servers, the scaling, the patching, all abstracted away. You just write the code for the task.
And deploy it super quickly.
Yeah.
It seems like the cost aspect is huge, too. You mentioned only paying for compute time.
That's a major benefit. It flips the model. Instead of fixed infrastructure costs, you have this variable, really granular expense that scales precisely with how much your code actually runs.
So it's not just saving a few pennies, it's a different way of thinking about cost and scaling. Levels the playing field a bit.
It really does. And what's fascinating is how well it handles those background tasks, things that need to happen asynchronously based on events.
Right.
You don't need a whole separate server infrastructure just sitting there waiting. Azure handles the high availability, the dynamic scaling. It just works when the event triggers it.
That really underscores their power for reactive computing.
Okay, they sound powerful, but I imagine listeners might be wondering, are there any, gotchas or situations where maybe Azure Functions aren't the best fit?
Yeah, that's a really important question. They absolutely excel at those stateless, event-driven tasks that finish quickly. But, if you've got something that needs to run for a really long time, minutes, maybe even hours, or if you need to manage complex state across several steps.
Okay, like a long workflow.
Exactly. Then a standard Azure function might hit limitations. You'd probably want to look at durable functions, which is actually an extension built on Azure Functions specifically for those stateful, longer workflows, or maybe integrate with other services.
So it's about using the right tool for the job. Makes sense.
Always.
Yeah.
But for that responsive, event-driven code,
Yeah.
they're often the perfect choice.
Okay. So given those strengths, who's really benefiting most? Is this mainly for the big tech giants or?
Oh, not at all. Startups, yeah, they love it. Rapid prototyping is huge.
Because it's fast. Incredibly fast. You can spin up backend APIs, data processing, whatever, sometimes in an afternoon. No need for a dedicated ops team right away.
Wow.
And enterprises, they use it all the time for automating workflows. Think about things that used to need complex, expensive server setups, like real-time notifications instead of batch jobs.
Right, I can see that. Transforming batch processing into instant alerts.
Precisely. And for individual developers, it's fantastic for just, gluing different systems together without reinventing the wheel every single time.
And it supports quite a few languages.
Oh,
Right?
yeah. C#, Java, JavaScript, Python, even PowerShell. So developers can usually work in a language they're already comfortable with.
Okay, so summing up then, Azure Functions really deliver on that serverless, event-driven promise. They let you forget the infrastructure.
Mostly, yeah.
Save time, save money, hopefully save some headaches, and just focus on writing the code that matters for your application.
Exactly. And that really leads to a final thought, maybe something for you, the listener, to consider. How could you start combining these powerful event-driven pieces? Because Functions integrate so well with other Azure services, things like Logic Apps for workflows, Event Grid for routing events everywhere, Cosmos DB for global data.
Right, the whole ecosystem.
Yeah, putting these building blocks together unlocks possibilities for automation and really scalable solutions that used to be incredibly complex, maybe even out of reach. So the question becomes, what complex problem, maybe one that seemed too daunting before, could you tackle next now that you have this approach in your toolkit?